Welcome to the Caribbean Moms Podcast with me, your host, Laura Dowrich-Phillips. Over the course of this series, our guests will be providing Caribbean mothers with expert advice, support, and conversation around the everyday challenges of raising children. Most of all, we're here to celebrate moms who are doing the most important job in the world. The CaribbeanMoms.com podcast is brought to you by Vaseline. Feel empowered through healed skin. Vaseline gives you the gift of moisturized skin that keeps up with the demands of life so that you can live without limits. In this first episode, we will discuss parenting styles, and I'm very pleased to welcome clinical psychologist Isolde Ali Ghent-Garcia, Managing Director of IAG and Associates, to discuss this topic. Welcome, Isolde, to the Caribbean Moms Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's great to see you again, Isolde. And today we are discussing parenting styles. Now, Isolde, you know, for a lot of women, when you become mothers, normally in the Caribbean, we follow whatever our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, our neighbors tell us to do, right? Whatever they did, we simply adopt. Could you tell us, for those who don't know, what are the different types of parenting styles and how do they impact children?
You know, Laura, when we have our babies, nobody ever gives us the manual, right? We figure it out and we learn our children and there's just so much to do. It could be so overwhelming, and the fantasy of having children and then the reality of having children, they kick in, and then there's that inner conflict sometimes where we just have to really sort of have this inner resolve and understanding and just processing it. So there are generally, I mean, we could speak general terms in terms of permissive parenting or the authoritarian parenting, the permissive parenting, where it's kind of more of almost an indulgent, laissez-faire parenting style where you just allow children just to be. And it's very warm, and it's very loving, and it's embracing. But that has its drawbacks as well, because then we don't necessarily hit all of the milestones when it comes to accountability. We rescue quite a bit instead of allowing kids to face the conflict situations and learn and build that inner fortitude, that resilience, build that mental toughness, which is so important for navigating life. The other side to that would be the authoritarian, where we are very, very controlling, do as I say. It's harsh, it's punitive, really takes a toll on self-esteem, can create this sense of insecurity, a sense of low self-esteem, dependency on the authority figure. So that in itself, it's not as warm and loving, but certainly does not facilitate accountability either, because you're also very dependent on the authority, the parent person form. And then, of course, then we have the authoritative, which is somewhere in between. So call it authoritative, call it conscious parenting, call it love and logic, call it what, it comes down to building that growth mindset and allowing your child to be who he or she is, to exploring who that is and accepting and validating the beauty of your child.
So, Isolde, it really sounds as if when you become a parent, you have to be really very conscious of a lot of things. You have to think about who you want this child to be and what kind of person you want to contribute to the world. But that could be very difficult and overwhelming when you are a new mother, when you've just given birth, when you're still struggling to figure out, okay, how to breastfeed, or how to feed my child, how to juggle having a child with my job, and depending on the degree of support that you have at home, it requires a lot of forethinking about this child. So what, that could be pretty overwhelming for a parent, especially a new parent.
Sure. And you're just talking about present tense situations, right? we can talk forever on this, on our daily stressors, whether we are working moms or we are stay-at-home moms. No matter what, we still have the responsibilities. The pandemic, that was a game changer, because there was so much more loading on women, so much more put on working moms. We had to sacrifice so much more, generally speaking, than our male counterparts, and each in terms of our own career planning and our progression, our development, many of us had to put our careers on the back burner to take care of children, to take up the slack with schooling, and we have still the echoes of the pandemic still resonating. Families were traumatized, children were traumatized, delayed learning the trajectory when it came to learning expectations. I'm seeing a lot of that right now, Laura, in my own practice, and seeing children who are just generally quite bright, quite capable, but with these learning gaps because children were out of school for so long in many of our different islands. So that's one aspect of it. So managing daily life, managing career and home and chores, and caring for our elderlies, our seniors, and then many of us, Laura, put aside the self-care, which is such an important, critical part to parenting. I'm going to throw something in. So, parenting in the Caribbean, because this is a Caribbean, podcast at the end of the day. Let's talk to Caribbean mummies. Let's talk to Caribbean parents. When it comes to looking at our Caribbean diaspora, where we have multiple cultures and generations and generations of, let's talk about it, we'll have to talk about it, trauma from the colonial days come down. And what I find I'm just going to refer to my practice, is that many Caribbean mothers present with a mixture of the permissive and the authoritarian, which can seem so confusing to children. And when we look at trauma lines, Laura, the first thing we look at is attachment to primary caregiver. So on the one hand, we have we talk about Caribbean women, we are loving. We are so loving. We hug up our children. We kiss up. We love hard. We're full of warmth and acceptance.
How do you then navigate through all of that to settle on something that will bring the best outcome for your child? Does it take a lot of you looking at self first?
Yes. Yeah, exactly so. So I think to really address that, which is a huge topic in and of, to look at all the factors that can come into parenting in the Caribbean, it is important that we know our history. It is important that we know what we have been handed down, our legacies from our foremothers and fathers, the suffering that they endured and what that did to their own viewpoints of life, their sense of trust and safety, because of the incredible level of intergenerational pain. Many of us live day in and day out triggered. Our worry brains are firing and firing and firing so that we're reactive. And when we look at that trauma center, if we are living every day in defense, then we're not operating with a sense of clarity. We're operating rather in a sense of being hypervigilant. And so the first thing is understand our histories. What have I been handed down? What gifts have I been given? But what is the legacy of my trauma experience as well, going back generation after generation, from slavery to indentureship, moving forward, mixed race, not being able to navigate where do I belong, talk about being from different cultures and sometimes cultures that are at war and very cliquish for fear. I mean, it's fear that drives us all. If you move forward in love, then you can love everybody and be present. But if you are fearful, and oftentimes this fear is handed down generation to generation, then you're not aware of what your duties of care are in the present tense. It can really cloud. So understand your history.
Yes.
Understand your history. What effect does religion have on your parenting style? Do you see do you see your children embracing? We talked about babies, we talked about children, the different developmental stages of a child as they grow up. The understanding, that's another part of it, understanding, well, what does this child need from me right now? A baby needs that understanding, that trust that somebody will be able to take care of him or her. Remember, it's just we pretty much have a brain stem going, and the rest of the brain is sort of developing as we go, right? So we have reactions. Yes. We have, I cry, you feed me, I cry, you change me. So the baby needs to know that somebody's going to take care of her in these early stages, and somewhere around, 3 months, and you look at your child, and she looks at you, he looks at you in the eye, and you see that first real smile, not gas. It's true smile. And there's the emotion. And there's that beautiful bond. And that's what you're looking for. And that's what generates that oxytocin and gets us all nicely bonded to one another. And it goes from being urgent to being this beautiful love dynamic between you and your baby. And then the gray matter develops as we go along.
Kicks in. So Isolde, when I had my first son, one of the challenges I had was with my mother. She accused me of reading too much. She said, "You're reading too much. You're not listening to me." So we fought about everything. How to put the baby to lie down. She insisted, put him on his stomach. I'm like, no, mommy, research has shown that leads to higher incidence of SIDS. I can't do that. She would tell me, put honey on the nipple of the bottle, so he would want to take the bottle. I'm like, no, mommy, you can't give children under a year honey because it could be dangerous. Yes. There were just all of these clashes all the time. So how, in context of everything that you're saying, and being present and being aware and doing your research and understanding yourself, how now do you stay firm in what you choose to do when you have all this pressure coming from your mother, your grandmother, your auntie, your mother-in-law, your neighbor? My mother-in-law always used to say, all your modern-day mothers, all you like to do this XYZ, long time we would do, all these things. How do you stay firm? What advice you would give to those mothers who are, they've reached to that point you're talking about. They understand their family. They understand their history. They've done the work on themselves. They understand this beautiful child needs. This is what this child needs. But then how do you manage that conflict with these people?
At the end of the day, there is merit to what the wise ones say. I think that it's important. Understand your love languages. I'm gonna go into that. I'm gonna sidestep and talk about our love languages. At the end of the day, why would a grandmother be so actively involved or be so very verbal? Because she loves. So. As opposed to, this is what we call reframing, Laura. As opposed to saying, well, you just want it your way and I have it my way. So instead of take a breathe, and understand, as I said before, that intergenerational conflict, because a lot of their parenting was born out of surviving such strife. And as women being downplayed, being cast aside, being dismissed, being used. So this was a way that we could find a sense of power and control. through our empowerment, raising good children, raising successful children. This was evidence of our success in, going through the lines. But when we really look at it, strong parents know to allow children to find their path. And when a child is happy, a child is successful because she's doing what she is meant to do and living an authentic life, there will be success. Our jobs, our roles as parents is to allow that path to naturally occur. So in dealing with our moms and our grannies and our aunties, we have to look at them through the eyes of love and understand that their intentions are only to ensure the success and growth and strength of the generations coming aboard. So if you understand the love logic in there, so you say, well, gosh, thank you so much for that advice. I'm sure that it really did work. Tell me about your experiences. What was it like? And then you let them talk, get them talking about what it was like parenting in their day. Well, what were the hardships that you faced? What were the successes? What worked? What didn't work? Nowadays, this is my experience. This is what's working. This isn't working. Because parenting now, and this generation of our kiddos, it's not like parenting before. Not even like parenting 10 years ago. And I'll tell you, I know I'm harping on it, but the pandemic was a game changer. So parenting this cohort of our beautiful Caribbean children is very different than what it used to look like even just a few years ago, 10 years ago.
In what way?
A lot more technology. They are more aware. Social media, both treacherous and informative as it is, has allowed for a lot of education, sensitizing. What I found with kiddos, especially the teens now, teaching them that even if you are in the mindset of championing this cause or that cause, by isolating other people in your journey, you're also being aggressive and you're also being prejudicial or giving misinformation, and it's just that righteous indignation that I think that we would face anyway with teens, but it's just been ramped up quite a bit. So it's fun though. It could be a very fun experience once we try to take ego out of it and just really sit back and enjoy the beauty of our children, their strengths, their convictions, their notions, and say, okay, well, educate me, enlighten me, tell me what's happening. How does this feel to you? Because this feels very weird to me, but I want to know more. And that's the kind of language that we can use with our kids and with our parents as well. Tell me more, tell me more.
Yes, and I've found, Isolde, that as children, as you go through the different phases of parenting, the styles change, don't they? Because you say we already in the Caribbean, we use a mixture of parenting styles, but you find that the styles change. So when you have a baby, you can choose what kind of parenting you want to, with that baby, but you're so involved. When you have a baby, when you have a toddler, when you have a young child, you're so involved as a parent. But then I find as your children they go into the teenage years, the parenting style becomes a little more passive.
Well, it depends. It depends.
So have you found that the styles change?
I mean, and I'm going to go back to the developmental milestones. Children need a certain amount of input when they're babies. They need that immediate gratification, the unconditional response. That's what babies need at the time. They have urgent needs and so on. But as they grow up, we have to encourage a certain level of independence so that they can do for themselves. So I wouldn't call it passive. I would say less hands-on, but we must observe.
Right.
Teenagers, again, like the toddler years, are turbulent years because the body is going through rapid change, the brain is going through rapid change, the hormones are flaring, and their awareness is enhanced. Again, taking into consideration influences of social media, pop culture, friends, school, religion, familial dynamics. So there's a lot coming at them at the time. So I wouldn't say that we should be passive. I think we should, because I guess in my mind, passive means not as present. Our kids will always need us to be very, very present. But what form that takes would depend on the situation. So say, for example, disappointment of not making it into a club, right? You wanted to be on the football team, you went for tryouts, you've been practicing so hard, and you didn't get it. So, I mean, our first instinct is, the mama bear. We want to jump in there, if we could take the pain, we would take the pain. Of course we would. We don't want to see them suffer. It hurts us worse than if we were suffering. But we can't. So, we were very reactive. And Laura, I've made my fair share of mistakes with my kiddos. So I know that angst. But then there are consequences. Okay, so can I call the coach and say, hey John, is Isolde here? I see that you're coaching. They say, oh gosh, well, Caribbean is who you know, and everybody knows somebody. We're only like at 1 degree of separation, right? But if we do that,
Yes, we all have been tempted to do that.
But I know his mummy. But I think I know his sister's best friend. I bet.
Yes.
We have to stop, because then that's worry brain. That's our own worry brains, and we never ever lead with the worry brain, as tempted as it might be, because amidst it all, Laura, it is those crisis situations that will teach our children to keep on keeping on, to persevere, to develop their passion, to discover who they are, to build that resilience, to build that mental toughness. And that is needed for life. If we try to rob them of that.
That's funny. Sorry, that's funny. As you were saying that, I just thought of this scenario. There are all these memes that talk about when you have your first child and you're super vigilant and the child falls down and you're like, oh my God, you're ready to call the ambulance, and you're going to the football games and everything, all kind of medicine and bandages and all sorts of things. And then you have the second child and it's like, whatever. They fall down. It's like, you just wait for the cry. If you don't hear anything, you just go on with life. They just think, get up, brush it off, and walk away.
Beloved David Bratt.
That reminded me of that.
I think about David Bratt when I think about things like that.
Yes.
What happened to you? Why you have the child in that outfit? Look, put a pampers and a vest on. Yeah, let the child run around. It's so cold, but it'll be cold what? Then child eat out of the pot. What you doing? I remember because I so paranoid. And because I worked with Dr. Bratt, he was able to say, "What you doing? Let the child just be,"
Yeah, so you find that parenting styles change depending on from child to child,
Absolutely.
right? It's like with the first child, you sometimes put so much on this first child, and then the subsequent children, it's like they pretty much raise themselves.
Well, I wouldn't say parenting style. I would say the approaches may be different. See, for me, the parenting style should always be one that promotes growth, that promotes validation of the authentic self, a parenting style that promotes evidence of competency and success. Most of all, that promotes a sense of worthiness. Because when you don't feel worthy of love or of your friends or of your accomplishments, then there's a lot of compensating that goes on. several times. Most of it's just really unhealthy. So no, the parenting style should always remain the same in the sense that you are promoting these attributes in all of your children. How you do it and the communication may be different depending on your child and your child's wants, personalities, but the parenting style should always be akin to building grit. Always be in alignment with building that growth mindset, which is developing the passions for life. Not emphasizing, well, I want to be a friend, or that's a mini me. They're not mini yous. I know you want to think that, but they are not. They are their own people. Leave them alone. Let them be them. They are their own people. They have different genetic inputs than you. They went to a different school. They have different friends. They're living in a different time. But what they are is yours to raise. You know, love them unconditionally. Love them for who they are. Your first, second, your third, your fifth. Each of them will come with their unique loadings. And love them all the same, but appreciate them for their differences. But the style, Laura, remains the same. The approach remains the same in that regard, that we are making sure that they are not sacrificing their senses of who they are, sense of self, in favor of external validation or, a social acceptance. Everybody is doing this, so I guess I should do this as well, even though inside it doesn't feel right. Well, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. Let's explore this. And if they feel stuck, don't tell them what to do, offer them choices. Some kids might do A, B, or C. What do you think? Let's have a discussion around it. And as you flesh it out, it will make more sense. And then they choose which is the best approach for them. They're going to make their mistakes. And we don't come down like, well, why you did that for? Why? I mean, that just adds shame and guilt to a mistake versus using that mistake as a learning experience. It's okay to make mistakes. Once you learn, mistakes grow brain muscles. They grow brain muscles, and it's okay. Once the lesson is learned in terms of who you are, strategies, that's a scientific model, isn't it? That's experimental. Yeah.
And also, so as you're saying that, it occurred to me that even sometimes, we adopt a particular style without realizing that maybe our children have some sort of hidden disability that particular style we adopted may not work with. So you might be authoritative, but your child is ADHD, and you may not be aware that this is what your child has. The symptoms might be there. You might notice that, okay, something's a little weird. I remember when I had my first son, he took a long time to latch to breastfeed, and I didn't realize at the time that could have been a possible symptom. Just little things along the way about his behavior kind of clued me that, okay, everything is not what it seems to be. I should get this checked out. And I brought him to you actually for his assessment. But yeah, so certain styles may not necessarily work depending on what's going on with your child. Could you speak a little bit to that?
I love that you brought that up, Laura. Thank you so much for bringing up those hidden disabilities, whether it's their language challenges, attention challenges, sensory challenges. And it comes down to finding the language that works with our children to reach them and the approaches that work with our children. And you're right, each child is different. So what would work well with one may not work well with the other. If you're talking about disabilities, though, and identifying whether your child may or may not have some sort of processing, just different ways of processing is I think being more on the neurodivergent spectrum versus neurotypical. You really talk and have that relationship with your pediatrician. I am blessed, again, I brought up David Bratt earlier on, because I've had a wonderful relationship with my children's pediatrician, and we still have a very strong one. I also know many other pediatricians and doctors who I know, here, that talk to your doctors as well if you have concerns with regards to meeting developmental milestones and so on, to make sure that talk to your preschool teachers. What is the language looking like? Are the milestones, is he or she engaging in interactive play at the time, or do you still see solitary play? So it's really important to have that bond with your co-stakeholders, if you will, your doctors, your teachers, your pediatricians, your relatives, people who are around, other caregivers who can give you that insight and refer to the specialist who can help guide and support. Because
yes, that is important.
It is. And language is really, really, really important so that they can connect to the world. Different types of language, whether it's nonverbal or verbal, reading cues, understanding boundaries, understanding why limits are put in place, how to form connections, being part of the pack. These are all very, very important. So if there's anything that can impede that connection, it can cause marked and acute anxiety and distress for both parent and child.
Yeah. Isolde, what do we need to do as a society to really impart this knowledge and education? Because, okay, let's face it, this conversation, we know there are certain sectors of society that will get it, right? That we can help by having this conversation. But then there are others who, they're not probably as educated, they're not as informed, they're caught up in the daily struggles of life, and that is, they've focused on that. How do we impart this information? Do we need to make it, do we need to have make sure all parents go through a parenting course when they have their babies? Do we need more checks on parents, on families when children are, their children come into this world? How do we reach and impart this knowledge? Because I feel like this is such an important conversation. And it's something that everybody could relate to, because once you have a child, you dropped into this world that you may not be, fully around with. You're just going with the flow. How do we reach more people with this kind of information?
I have to say that on my end, I am really, really honored and privileged to be part of Childline. So for us, we have an amazing coordinator who organizes a lot of outreach to more of the rural areas, at least in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is just one example of where the NGOs are super important in providing care and support and education. And because you're right, so many times, parents, as much as they do love, you have basic safety needs that need to be met. So you have exhausted parents, you have exhausted mummies who say, I really would love to do all of this. I would love to read, but I just don't have the time. I don't have the support. It's me and multiple children. I'm on my own. Whether you're single or both parents are working, or you're together, but you're just both exhausted, depleted. Where do I find these resources? So I think the outreach programs or services that are government initiated, as well as the NGOs, really need to work in tandem with each other, because I don't think the government can do it all. That's why they need to have alliances with NGOs who will also help facilitate these programs and be able to reach families all over your country, all over the region even. But the education part of it is important. Providing, say, in your community centers, places where maybe you can bring your children and there would be childcare provided while parents attend parenting classes.
Yes.
Or even have the meal provided for parents and children. So that evening, moms and dads don't have to worry about cooking, don't have to worry about childcare. They have it all provided for you that day so that you can just be a parent. You can breathe and sit down and just get that love and camaraderie and support from other parents as well, having parenting support groups where we've moved away from the village, Laura. We used to be so much more of a village. Growing up, your aunties and your uncles and your cousins and people in your neighborhood and used to come together. And we've become so polarized. We have little islands now, even within our own Caribbean, which you used to see that more in other countries, not so much here. But we just see people who are so alone. But we cannot be alone. There has to be a support. So for me, the outreach programs like what Childline, I could speak about Childline, but I know the Coalition does a lot of work, and so many other wonderful NGOs that do that, Kids in Need, and so that outreach work. But it has to be in line also with, I think, government initiatives to provide support and education and ensure that the basic needs are met. Because think about your Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If your basics of safety aren't met, how are you supposed to learn? How are you supposed to perceive, to produce, unless you're safe? Safety is key. So we have to provide those safe spaces. And we all need to do our parts. We all have to, lots of moving parts, we have to do our part. How do we provide the outreach, or at least contribute if we don't know how to? How do we ensure that this is done? To educate people.
All very valid points. Yeah. All very valid points, Isolde, especially that, we're not our neighbors' keepers anymore. Everybody's afraid to get involved with each other.
And the fear is real, Laura. The fear is real. Look at the domestic violence we have. Look at the random domestic violence that we have regionally, up and down the Caribbean. And to have the community where you get to meet your neighbors, right? That you have the phone line tree. Hannah, I think something is happening with Clara next door. Let me call Laura and let me call Deborah, and let's get together and see what's happening. We'll go over, we'll bake a little something and go and sit down with her, and just to have that love. The more you love, the more you will be loved. But the worry brain,
that is true.
The worry brain, that fear response says, no. It's about me, it's about mine, it's about my little house. Everybody stay away because they'll want what I have, and they'll, fear. But if you love is infectious. We have to remember to love.
It is.
We have to remember to
and
love.
That is a perfect note to end this discussion, Isolde. But before we go, can you give us, our listeners, at least 2 to 3 key takeaways that they could use in their daily lives when it comes to this topic of parenting styles?
Number 1, to parent means that you have to take care of yourself. You have to make sure that you have the energy and that you have the inner resources so that you have resources to give those you love. That airplane, remember that airplane, you put on your oxygen mask first and then you put it on the child because it doesn't help if both of y'all pass out, right? So 1, mums and dads, but women, we are so used to being taught that we sacrifice so that others will survive. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Take care of yourself so that you can go about the business of caring for others, number 1. Number 2, build that growth mindset in your children. It's not about controlling, and it's not about being their best friend. It's about loving and seeing them and validating, letting them know that you see who they are and you see their successes and validating them as human beings, letting them see their worthiness, letting them see that they are competent to go out into the world, letting them know it's okay to make mistakes because mistakes are teaching moments. And number 3, modeling the behaviors that you want to see your child emanate, display, carry on. So if you don't want your children to scream, hey, guess what? Don't shout at them, right? If you want your children to be part of a greater community, make sure you're taking them with you when you go volunteer at the TSPCA, or you're volunteering at anything you do, community service. Model the desired behaviors for your children and they will follow suit. You are their primary role model. So it's no longer do as I say, not do as I do, because they're watching you and they're bright and they are perceptive. So model it. All things in moderation.
Thank you so much for your wisdom, your expertise, your advice, your information. This was very informative.
And again, thank you
we
so
definitely
much.
will have you back again on the Caribbean Moms podcast. So thank you so much for being here as our guest. The CaribbeanMoms.com podcast is brought to you by Vaseline. Feel empowered through healed skin. Vaseline gives you the gift of moisturized skin that keeps up with the demands of life so that you can live without limits. This podcast was produced by CaribbeanMoms.com. Subscribe now for more episodes in our series.